Okay, you ready?
Okay, we're right on time with our targets here because we are doing chapters 22 and 23 today. And then next week, the 17th, is a holy day, and in which we also will drink from a sacred cup. And then we will return, having recovered. And do you know what the color of the dye is that they put into the river? It's green, and when it ends up there, you know what color it is when they pour it in? Orange. Yeah, so they got the big orange paint going in, and then all of a sudden it turns green. It's just like the Irish, people of miracles. You can ask any snake. So what we're going to do today is, excuse me.
Are you okay with
These
listening?
two chapters, contiguous, one after the other, obviously, that's why they're numbered. Remember that these things were not numbered by the authors, nor were the authors putting things into paragraphs or sentences. The authors were instead waiting for at least 1,200 years or so. And with the advent of printing, it really accelerated the annotation of these texts because it took about 2 years to write out a text with all the monks doing their stuff. And you could do like for the all-encompassing book of from the I want to say up in Minnesota, but it's not just the St. John's University, but it's St. John's Abbey, and they got at a cost of about $8 million, and they brought in the calligrapher from the Queen of England to show people how to write because they wanted to have a uniform writing. And so what they did was they trained everybody to do it. They could do about a page a day in each one of them because they'd be very careful. So now what we do is on this material today, you see we have a thing here that says how to read Acts 22. I'm going to read this. I'm not going to read the one for 23 because we just have a certain amount of time, because we would like to show, if we can, some movie parts today, just so we can get back into kind of a visual of all these things that are happening to us. So let's take a look, and we'll read it together here, how to read Acts 23. It says, Paul speaks to his audience. Now remember, Paul has taken his journey. And in the journey, what Paul does, and we had a map to that effect, he goes up the coastline of Asia Minor, cuts across and comes down the coastline of Turkey. And there he stops at various places. And one place, he even has to pick up the body of a person because he gave a long lecture through the night. And this young man was sitting on the windowsill on the third floor and fell over backwards and died. So Paul, of course, came out and picked him up and brought his life back. Yes, it's a happy ending. So Paul speaks to his audience in Hebrew so they would pay attention. He begins with a statement about the most significant rabbi in Israel, Gamaliel, being his mentor in the details of the ancestral laws of the Jews. He was zealous in pursuing what was in his mind about the Christians, and his Herculean efforts to roust them out of their existence among the Jews, even going so far as Damascus to bring them back in chains. Now that's all Paul. So what he's doing is he's talking and he's telling you that he studied under Gamaliel, which are his credentials. It'd be like, the most famous kind of understander of the Jewish scriptures was this Gamaliel. They had not only the scriptures, but they also had other side writings and things like that that added to some of the copies of what the rabbis would be talking about all day long. But the text actually was from Gamaliel. And so he would be there, and Paul was number 2 then of all the people studying. And we'll see in a page or two where we have a diagram, and we'll see that's where Paul is teaching. So anyway, he was zealous in pursuing what was in his mind about the Christians, which is, in Paul's mind, is that they were heretics and they were destroying Judaism, because what they were doing eventually, the thing that Paul gets charged for, is that they are they're not paying attention to the temple. Remember Stephen? Why did Stephen get stoned? Because he was a Hellenistic Jew who says you don't need the temple anymore because we have Jesus Christ. He is the Lord. Destroy, in John's gospel, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will rebuild it. Everybody thinks that's crazy until the time of the resurrection, when you find out he's in the tomb for 3 days, and then of course it makes some sense. So anyway, that's what Paul is doing. He says even going up to Damascus. Now there's a famous road that goes all the way from Cairo, Egypt, all the way up along the coastline of Israel, and then across the top of the Galilee area, and then goes up to the further north to this Damascus, which was one of the great cities of the ancient times. And so Paul will do that. Now that's 135 miles, so that's a couple of days walk. Paul might have been on a horseback, he might have been in a cart, he might have been just walking. It's certainly, you say, what do they do when they're taking a long journey like that? Well, it's perfect for Paul, because what he does is he starts to foam at the mouth, because he's got his anger going about these Christians and stuff like that. So anyway, you might want to check here. And he's going to bring them back in chains, which is ironic. So many times we find, oh, excuse me, there was a picture that came up. So, okay. Keep talking. Okay. So Paul, then Paul goes on to his own conversion to Jesus. So after he's explained to him the perfidy that he caused for Christians is over with, and now he is a Christian himself. And so then he goes on to talk about his own conversion. Now we have in Acts 22 and Acts 24, we're going to get Paul's kind of statement about how he got Christ in his mind and being. We had in chapter 9, we had an indication of this. There's also in the letter to the Galatians, there is a section. So there's 3 major times when Paul is stated for how he became a Christian. And they're slightly different. I got a book last year. I went through it thoroughly. I couldn't believe it. This writer wrote a whole book just on those 3 statements. Here's one of them here. What 24 is the other. The Galatians thing is another, where Paul makes an explanation. And each one has a slight twist to it. You'd think you couldn't get a book out of that, but if you're a scholar, you got to make a living. So then Paul goes on to his own conversion. Paul realized, I contend, that this was his only chance that he had been waiting for. See, he's just been waiting all the time since for somebody to ask, why are you now hanging around with the Christians? He's just waiting for somebody of magnitude to come up and ask him that question so he can give the answer to it. And so the opportunity to speak to his fellow Jews in the heart of Jerusalem and to testify to the gospel of God's grace. He had made it quite plain that he was willing to die in Jerusalem for the name of the Lord Jesus. He said that. Now he says that in some of his writings too. If you go to his 2 Corinthians, or you go to his letters to Timothy, or to the Philippians or others, he will talk about his death. And so he's willing. In fact, he says in one of those writings, he says, we live in the Lord, but if we die in the Lord. He says, we would rather right now die, so that we could be in heaven with the Lord. But since that's not the case, so we will now live with Jesus in us here on earth until the time comes when we get to be in heaven. So anyway, if death was to come, what better place than in the city where Jesus himself had died for him? So it was now or never. The message, though, about Jesus came across clearly. Paul's encounter with the Jesus of Nazareth on the Damascus road, whom Paul then repeatedly identified as the Lord. And anytime you hear that word Lord with a capital L, you're going to find out that means the divine one. Because who was the one who doubted that Jesus had risen from the dead? Well, Thomas. And notice how 7 days later, because John's gospel is based on sevens, sometimes some people say even 7 days in a week, so that it was his whole gospel was weeks. That's a separate question. So what happens here is 7 days later, after the resurrection and after Jesus visits with his apostles, 7 days later, you get the fulfillment or completion of the whole resurrection scene, because of the fact that now on the seventh day, the apostle who was the questioner, that's what I put, not the doubter, the questioner, became a person who would give the greatest title to Jesus in the New Testament, my Lord and my God. So you couldn't get anything better than that. He is not the Messiah or the Savior or this, that, the other thing as alone. He is the Lord our God. So we will find that in the text when we read that. So anyway, the message though about Jesus came across clearly. He was the Lord. Paul's being baptized to wash away his sins. So he tells them about that. You remember Ananias takes him out there. Ananias, who was a very devout Jew. This is one of the strange things. He's a very devout Jew, but he is now a Christian. And so they don't say a Jew who had become now a convert to Christianity. They just say Ananias is, and he's the one who tells Paul, to be baptized and to take a strong look into who Jesus was. So the good news was being proclaimed in Jerusalem now. So Paul continued and lost their peacefulness when he stated that Jesus called him to preach to the Gentile. Whoa, it is bad enough that he leaves the Jews, but then to leave the Jews to go to the Gentiles as if they are the receiver. So you have to understand this. We're talking about 1,800 years of faith experience from Abraham down to this moment, and 1,800 years. So it's embedded in it's their DNA, their consciousness is just filled with this. And all of a sudden, it's like you're going to throw that away because of the fact that now Jesus is coming. So therefore, what we're going to do is go to the ends of the earth. Which is the injunction that Matthew gives in chapter 28, 18 to 20, the very end of his gospel. It says, go to the ends of the earth. I paraphrase. And so that sent the crowd into a frenzy. Rid the earth of him, he's not fit to live. So now there's a Roman commander there, and he says, what's going on here? Because he doesn't want to be, having the riots right in the temple area. So needed urgently what Paul, a Roman citizen, was being charged with. The answer was to bring Paul before the Sanhedrin at the meeting site. See, as soon as he finds out he's a Roman, and the royal stoa. Now there's two places where the Sanhedrin meets. One is up on the platform, and it's on the western side of the whole platform, in the center of which is the Holy of Holies and the temple area, and a big sign across the top of it. You cannot enter into this if you are a Gentile under the pain of death. And so that's going to be a problem. So anyway, so Paul is now identified as a Roman citizen. So this soldier is doing the right thing, which is he's not going to take any part in, having Paul done anything. So what he does is he beats him for a while, and then he brings Paul before the Sanhedrin at the meeting site. And the next day, Paul was brought there under heavy guard. Paul had only finished his first sentence when Ananias had someone strike him on the mouth. This is a different Ananias. This is the high priest. And that's to be continued. That'll be in chapter 23. Okay, now we have read the introduction, and now we'll look at the actual text. So this will be kind of a reprise of what how to read it is going to be. Is that making some sense? So what happens is in chapter 21, before this, remember, Paul met with James, who was the official leader of the Christian community, Jewish Christian community in Jerusalem. And so now it says, my brothers and sisters, listen to what I'm about to say to you in my defense. When they heard him addressing them in Hebrew, they became all the more quiet. And he continued, I am a Jew, born in Tarsus in Cilicia. Cilicia is the very southeast corner of Turkey. It's the area right at the bend where you go up to Antioch of Syria, and you turn left. And at that elbow there, that's where Paul was, Tarsus, which is a very high museum kind of place for scholarship and for artwork and culture and all things of elements. So it's a very fancy place. Be like our Burr Ridge here or something. Did I say that? It'd be like one of our places. So anyway. So at the feet of Gamaliel, I was educated strictly in our ancestral. I was at the feet of Gamaliel. That is a sign of honor, because the rabbis always sat in the middle and people stood around him. Whereas we have it, the teacher stands in front of a student body in chairs. And so he's already kind of identified as a mirror of Gamaliel. And just as all of you are today, persecuted this way to death. See how it's capitalized there, emphasis, binding both men and women and delivering them to prison. Even the high priest and the whole council of elders can testify on my behalf. See, what he's doing is reviewing all the things that happened to him at the end of his Jewish life, and then his continuation of it's like Christianity is the seed in his mind, and the flowering plant up above is Jesus, the Christianity. So it's not like we're doing away with Judaism. What we're doing is we're seeing that Judaism is continuing, but it's continuing with the Messiah now with us, and that Messiah is taking us up to heaven. And so we have, for the mind of Paul and for others, this is a continuity of the whole program. So even the high priest and the whole council can testify on my behalf. From them I received letters to the brothers and set out for Damascus to bring them back in chains. Now notice how he's going to bring people back in chains back to Jerusalem, and then they're going to be judged and probably executed, and just like Stephen. And so because they've been committing heresy. And on that journey, I drew near to Damascus. About noon, a great light from the sky suddenly shone around me. Now, this is a beautiful statement, because what it means is 93 million miles away, some 15 minutes or so to traverse that empty space, comes down out of the darkness and pow, knocks him over. Because light is always a symbol of understanding and of prayer. And at nighttime, the rabbis would take Nicodemus, would study, and they would take these little clay pots and put a light in the oil and then sit there and study. So even in the nighttime, they were studying what it was to be an authentic Jew. It says, why are you persecuting me? Comes the voice from the above. And of course, we've commented on this many times if you heard this before. It says, instead of saying, why are you persecuting my church, or why are you persecuting my people? It says, why are you persecuting me? In other words, the mystical body of Christ contains the followers of Jesus, but it is Jesus. And so what's happening is that if you offend the followers, you are offending Jesus. And if you are offending Jesus, that suffering comes to us too. So we bear Jesus' suffering. If you go to Paul's letters, that we take the suffering of Christ on the cross and bring it into our hearts. And at the same time, we take our sufferings and give them over to the Lord. I've already commented on that in terms of the woman of hemorrhaging, who for 12 years has spent all her money and so just touched the cloak there, see, and stuff. And it said she suffered greatly. And that's a phrase in Greek, suffered greatly. The woman did. Jesus, when he's telling his disciples 3 times over on the walk to Jerusalem in Mark's gospel, he says, I'm going to suffer greatly. So there's only 2 places in the entire New Testament where that phrase with that Greek is announced. One is from the woman saying she suffered greatly. Jesus telling his disciples he will be suffering greatly. So what we do is we kind of sew those together. So the suffering of Jesus on the cross becomes a healing power for us. And the suffering of the woman means that she allies herself with the Jesus that is going to break his heart in love for everyone else. So this is kind of a melding together. It's a beautiful statement of writing, and it helps to get that. It's not comes across well anyway. It says, my companion saw the light, but did not hear the voice of the one who spoke to me. I asked, what shall I do, sir? The Lord says, go up and go to Damascus. There you will be told everything appointed for you. And since I could see nothing because of the brightness of the light, I was led by hand by my companions and entered Damascus. Now notice I put down there, see chapter 9, 1-30, and it matches up with chapter 9 here now. I should say verse 9 with up to 22:9. So this whole thing about the identification of Paul's activities and things like that are recorded. It says, I saw nothing but the light. This devout observer of the law, Ananias, and highly spoken of by all the Jews who lived there, came to me and stood there and said, Saul, my brother, regain your sight. At that very moment, I regained my sight and saw him. Now, remember, again, sight is visual. We would say that from our eyes, but it really is from the soul. Because when you see, you are able to understand, and you're able to reflect, and you're able to have a kind of a filling of knowledge and faith Remember Bartimaeus in John's gospel, in Mark's gospel. There's at the beginning of his journey, a man is touched. He's blind, and he had to be touched twice to see, because that's like the apostles. They're going to need more than just Jesus being told that he's going to suffer. They have to see it. But at the end of that, as they start to go up to Jerusalem, you would think, well, the apostles are going to, kind of take the lead. No, Jesus takes the lead. And who follows him? Bartimaeus, because he said, "Out, King of David, son of David, son of David," because David had been a covenant with the last covenant that we had with God was with David. And so what he does is he says, "What do you want?" He says, "I want to see." So you're thinking, well, what he wants to do is to see visually. It's a miracle in biology, and then just we go on. The opposite is different, is quite profound, and that is that when he now sees, he can see visually, but now what he sees with his soul is that Jesus is the true one, and so he relishes that, and what does he do? He follows Jesus on the way. So here you have this entourage of Jesus, the man who now sees Jesus better than the disciples do, I might add, because they're arguing with each other about which ones of us are going to sit at the right and the left when Jesus makes the kingdom happen. And even they get their mother, and Jewish mothers are very in supportive of their children. I told that to my Jewish doctor. I said there was a Protestant and a Catholic and a Jew, three mothers. After shopping, they just stopped to talk, and each maid says, "Well, when do you think that your child has really grown up?" And one said this, and then the other said that. Then the Jewish woman said, "Well, he really became a man when he graduated from medical school." So, that was what the determining factor that you could tell a Jewish mother's attitude towards her children was they're going to be successful. We had Jewish parents living right next door to us in Joliet, and sure enough, their son was our doctor. So enough of that. So Saul, my brother, regain your sight. At that very moment, I regained my sight and saw him. Then he said, "God of our ancestors designated you to know his will, to see the righteous one, and to hear the sound of his voice. For you will be witness before all what you have seen and heard. Now why delay? Get up and have yourself baptized, and your sins washed away, calling upon his name." So Paul is baptized. He would be baptized with the water, as John the Baptist would do, and he's also baptized with the Holy Spirit, as Jesus would do. And so now he is able to see. After that, I returned to Jerusalem. While I was praying in the temple, I fell into a trance. And then the Lord speaks to him. Now, we don't get too many in the history of the church. We don't get too many times when Jesus, the Lord, comes in to visit us. You have that with Mary, do you not? I mean, you have a National Geographic put down one time a great big huge map of all the places that had some kind of a statement of a apparition of Mary. I think about 80 of which have been approved by the church, and the other 100, 200, or whatever it was, are just there. But there is one that's been approved that's up here in Wisconsin. Did you know that, in the middle of the America? Yeah, we got one up there. You've been up there, yeah. So it's right above Green Bay. So it's an appearance of Our Lady and accepted. So anyway, but this is a thing of Jesus. Pius XII. I'm going to make a date, 1953 or so, asked God to let him die. He's just worn out with all the stuff of the war and all the sorrow he saw. He alone was responsible, historians will tell you, for saving the lives in Italy, Bulgaria, and other places, saving the lives of 800,000 Jews. If you go to Hungary, 410 or 20,000 of the Jews were all put on trains and taken up to Auschwitz. Bulgaria was saved. Italy was saved. They took in all these people, put them into homes, put them into basements, gave them baptismal certificates, did all kinds of things. And so it did not become the slaughterhouse of Jews. We just had that, just with a bomb dropping with this situation in Kiev. In Kiev, back in 1941, there was a small fire and somebody had to take the blame for it. So they blamed the Jews because the Nazis were all over the place in Ukraine. And so what they did was they took them one by one, and they furrowed out of the earth a great big huge ditch, take off your clothes, leave them here, walk 10 yards, stand there and jump into the pit. And as they do that, you get a shot in the back of the head. So the body would be there, the mother lying on the warm body of a child, or a child on the warm body of the grandfather, whatever. 33,000 in one day were shot in the back of the head and put into this trench. So what happened about a week ago? One of the bombs from the Russian plane dropped it right on that spot. So it's almost like saying it never ends, does it? This hatred that comes into the world that brings us nothing but dissolution. And the Russians have made a statement today. We are not going to move out of here until they surrender. So they're going to kill them all, 40 billion. And they've done it before. They did it before. Stalin did that. That's anywhere from 8 to 11 million people starved to death. So they've done it before. They'll do it again. So this is the evil that can come upon us. I just want to mention all that. So anyway, so what happened with the pious is Jesus said to him, "I need you," and so he didn't die. I need you. And then 4 years later, in 57, he did die, and that's when John the 23rd came in to be the Pope. You know, a very happy, lucky guy. So he was at some kind of a gala dinner in Paris one time, and this woman had a very revealing dress, I might add. I don't have pictures, but I mean, I'm just telling you from. So anyway, and so everybody that was there was not looking at this woman. They were looking at John the 23rd. He was a cardinal at that time, to see if he was looking at her. So he had a great sense of humor. So I'm sorry to take up your time. I had that experience, as I told you before. I was invited along with another dozen of American educators to dialogue with the German educational system in Bonn, Stuttgart, Munich, and Berlin. When we got to Stuttgart, they had a big lunch for us, and the mayor came, and the mayor was Manfred Rommel, son of the Desert Fox. And they did have now this is back in the 80s, 84. I was young at that time, but I already had made my mark. And so anyway, there was a lady reporter there, and she too had kind of a loose clothing. And I just had a short glance of it, because I looked around to see all my compadres there. There were 12 of us or so. They were all looking at me to see if I was looking at her. Oh, well. So, well, you know what? Because you paid your $15, so we should get to the material. What do you think? So this is what Paul did. So anyway, he says, I replied, Lord, they themselves know that from synagogue to synagogue you used to imprison and beat those who believed in you. When the blood of your witness Stephen was being shed, I myself stood there giving my approval, keeping guard over the cloaks of his murderers. Then he said to me, go, I shall send you far away to the Gentiles. In other words, Jesus, the Lord, has already given him another time when he was going to encourage Paul. But now he's got a specific mission for him, which is, this is not the place where you're going to die. Paul said he would die in Jerusalem, if that is what the case was. But Jesus, the Lord, said, you're not going to die here. He doesn't tell him about later, but you can imagine that there is something on the horizon. He says, now I'm sending you to the Gentiles. So this is where we get this very alluring title of Paul, the Apostle to the Gentiles. So anyway, then Paul, so that finishes this section. I want to get to the nub of it by saying that he gave a full history of how he became a Christian, and they were ready to riot because of that. And then this word of Jesus to him, which is, you are now appointed as the apostle to the Gentiles. That is why I spoke to you on the road. It's why I knocked you over. All of that was through the Holy Spirit. We're taking care of you because we need you. He doesn't say that to Peter or to John or to Thomas or to James, any of them. He says it to Paul, this genius of a person imbued with scripture and knowledge of where we had been, and given in a vision of where we should be and will be. So then Paul in prison. So they listened to him until he said this, and they raised their voices and shouted. So now these are times here, if we're in between the Passover, where Paul had wanted to get there to the time of Pentecost, which is 49 plus 1, 7 times 7 plus 1. So in that time zone, we seem to think that this would be what he's talking about here, that they're ready now to kill him. It says, take such a one as this away from this earth. It's not right he should live. And just as they were yelling and throwing off their cloaks and flinging dust into the air, the cohort commander ordered him to be brought to the compound and gave instruction that he be interrogated under the lash. Now, the Roman lash had several prongs coming out of it because you had a handle, and then you had leather strips going out, sometimes two, sometimes many, but just if you just had two, it was enough. And at the end, you had either a lead-like little dumbbell or a ankle bone of a sheep or something. And so as they started to lash you from the back, and it would come around to your side, and it would bury itself in your skin, and boom, they would pull it out. And so the Romans never followed the Jewish law, which was 40 times you can have the lash given, minus 1 just in case you miscounted. So they always gave 39, but the Romans, they didn't care. So we don't know how much it did for Paul and on his bare back. And the Shroud of Turin by Dr. Barbet from France, in his book back in the early 1950s on a doctor at Calvary, said looking at the Shroud of Turin, there was about 110 different places in the shroud's image where a lash would have opened up the skin. So this is, there's no person, the doctors will tell you, no person could have survived even the march up to the place of crucifixion due to the punishments that they had already given Jesus. Usually, that would be enough to kill a person. So anyway, but when they stretched him out for the whips, Paul said to the centurion on duty, "Is it lawful for you to scourge a man who is a Roman citizen and has not been tried?" Whoa, that changes his mind right there. He says, because he doesn't want to get in trouble. These reports go back to Rome, by the way. They do. You think, well, that's not that important. These things go back to Rome. And, the commander had a Roman citizen without being tried, lashed and stuff like that. So the timing of these type of things is very significant. So when the centurion heard this, he went to the cohort commander, reported it, says, "What are you going to do? This man is a Roman citizen." So, see, Pontius Pilate became very famous, of course. He's the one person we have in our creed and everything. But he himself was fired as the commander at Caesarea of the whole province of military in the year 36. So now here we are, we're talking here about the year maybe 56 or 57 or 58. We can take a look at that. And so we're some years later, but they still remember Paul and they still remember all these things. So this man is saving his own skin. So the commander says, "Tell me, are you a Roman citizen?" "Yes." The commander replied, "I acquired this citizenship for a large sum of money." Paul said, "But I was born one in Tarsus." At once those who were going to interrogate him backed away from him, and the commander became alarmed when he realized he was a Roman citizen, that he had him bound. And isn't that interesting? When Jesus goes to, they capture him in the Garden of Gethsemane, he is bound. And just as in a chiastic structure, Jesus at the beginning of the Passion narrative is bound, and then at the end of the Passion narrative is bound in a shroud. So these phrases are significant. So, because you know what a chiasm is, it's like a pyramid. So the whole of the Passion narrative is from Jesus speaking from the cross as the peak. But what you have here is he's bound, and he's bound in a sheet of death. And so that's what happens with Paul. This is all almost like an imitation of Jesus. The next day, wishing to determine the truth about why he was being accused by the Jews, he freed him, ordered the chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin to convene. Then he brought Paul down and made him stand before them. Now, just one more look at this map here, St. Paul's third missionary journey. And like I say, this is most likely in the late 50s. I see how he leaves Antioch of Syria, goes to Tarsus, his hometown. Are you following it here? Then he goes to Derbe and Lystra and Iconium, the places he has in the first and second missionary journeys. And then he goes to Phrygia. That's where Antioch of Phrygia is. And then he goes up all the way up to the coastline. And then from the coastline, he goes over to Neapolis, which is not on there, to Philippi. From there, he comes down to Thessalonica and Bereus. And then he comes down to Athens and Corinth. Then what he does in Corinth, he stays there for a couple of years. Then he goes back up, maybe a year and a half, I should say. Then he goes back up to the area, places where he had just visited. See how the arrows go. Then he comes around. They wanted him to take a ship across, but he doesn't. He wants to walk, so he walks, and he has an entourage with him. When he gets to that place of my eyes are beating up here. We first of all we got Assos, and you got Troas, and then you have Mytilene. That's the place I was thinking of. And remember, this is where Paul is staying up through the night giving his lecture, where his student falls out of the window. And so then he doesn't want to go to Ephesus, because if he goes to Ephesus, it will be a terrible, terrible scene of sadness, because he will be leaving them. And as he does go down the road a little bit to Miletus, the leaders of Ephesus come to be with him. And we read this the other day. So they were all crying and weeping and holding on to him and kneeling before him. And so it was great sadness. Then he takes they go by roads, I should say. Then they go to Patara, which is a port. Then they come to Tyre and Ptolemais, which are ports. And then they take a road down to Caesarea and then down to Jerusalem. So that's where we have covered so far. So now Paul is in Jerusalem, and he is in the control. So now, how are we doing on time? 25 minutes? 45 minutes. Holy man. You want to hear some more stories? Yeah. No. I did some for getting ready for St. Patrick's Day. I had this touched by the Holy Spirit, a Irish poem, because the Irish have a great sight of putting the eternal into the temporal. And this thing is called The Inner History of Each Day. It's an Irish poem. It says, no one knows the name of this day. See what from that you should garner that this is going to be a poem about today, not yesterday or tomorrow. You know, we can look at history, or we can look at, plans for the future. We're just talking about this day, and this day in its totality from the beginning to the end. A person like Edith Stein would fit this perfectly, because this is exactly how she prayed. On this day in the morning and on this night, I conclude it, and tomorrow will be a new day, like a resurrection. So no one knows the name of this day, born quietly from the deepest night. It hid its face in light, demanded nothing for itself, opened out to offer each of us a field of brightness that traveled ahead, providing in time, ground to hold our footsteps, and the light of thought to show the way. The mind of the day draws no attention. It dwells within the silence with elegance, to create a space for all our words, drawing us to listen inward and outward. We seldom notice how each day is a holy place, where the Eucharist of the ordinary happens, transforming our broken fragments into an eternal continuity that keeps us. Somewhere in us is a dignity presiding that is more gracious than the smallness that fuels us with fear and force, a dignity that trusts the form a day takes. So at the end of this day, we give thanks for being betrothed to the unknown, and for the secret work through with the mind of day and the wisdom of the soul becomes one. Well, the mind of the day and the wisdom of the soul. So all of a sudden we are taken into the eternity. So I thought that might be helpful to understand as we read about Paul being captured now and wondering what's going to happen. So we're going to go day by day. So with that in mind, yes. Is there an author for it? Well, yes, but no. I think it's O'Donoghue. I spend most of my Irish poetry comes from O'Donoghue. I've used this and I will continue to use this in homilies at funerals. And not the whole thing, but the bottom part here. Now, with that in mind, we're going to go to here. I'm going to go out of the picture for a moment. I'll be back. How to read Acts 23. I'm not going to do that because we want to show some movie. Take a look at this map. I don't think I'll be able to see it carefully unless I drink from the chalice. You can see what a large thing it is. It's actually 40 acres. The whole complex you see there is 40 acres. I mean, that's huge. That's like, you know, out here from the frontage road all the way over to Bailey and in between. So this area was rebuilt by Herod. You can see how it slopes. It slopes downward. In fact, if you continue down on this road, there's a deep gully below this, because Jerusalem has two great big heights. One with this temple area, which is the highest part, and then the other over on the other side, which is where you would find Annas and Caiaphas and Herod and Mark's parents, where they celebrated the Last Supper, etc. So here you see how huge this thing is. Herod's device was to level it off by bringing these huge rocks and stone things and carved very carefully, and then having them lowered onto the base. So you can see up on the top there is, you know, it starts, and the visual is that this would be level all the way across on the top, but it would mean that there would have to be much more rock down at the southern end here to build it up so that it would be even across. So it's not, otherwise the whole thing would be sloping down. Am I making some sense here? And you can see in the center is the temple area. Now, by the temple area, we do not mean the entire platform. That is the temple area, but the temple itself is the inside that ring that you have a stone wall, and that's where you can't come in. The first corridor you come in is the place of the women. Then you go up 13 steps and you come to the place of the men, when that's where the sacrifice of the animals would take place and blessings and other things. Then you can see a very heightened area there, and that's because you're going to enter into the building that is a predecessor to the Holy of Holies. Then when you go inside, you're going to come across the great cloth, and inside of that will be the Holy of Holies with the Ark of the Covenant and other things. And you can see a picture of that. This is a model up there of what the Holy of Holies would be. See in the back there how tall that building is coming up. That's where they put a lot of gold. Josephus tells us that they, like the Queen of Sheba and others came, and they would give gold. And one of the gold things that they did was they take that great big tall entranceway, and they would have vines going up and across and down. And on those vines, you would find clusters of grapes. It takes a little imagination to think that, oh, if you go over to the right-hand side, you see the Mount of Olives, that as Jesus was walking along in his Last Supper discourse, it takes a couple of hours to get from where he was going up to up here, and just walking carefully. And what would he do? He'd look backwards, and you can see the top of this great building there with all its vines and stuff like that. And what does he say in chapter 15:1? I am the vine, you are the branches. So it's not I am the vine and you are the grapes. No, you are the branches. In other words, you are put right into being with the stem. And the product is the grapes, which is the love that you bring. So this is Jesus' image there. We can take a longer time. If you go way down to the bottom, look at those people. They're very small in those days. You can see people going up the steps there. They're in that particular area, they'd be going in to take a mikvah, which is a washing. And so the rabbis and other officials of the temple area, they'd have to wash before they went to action up on the top. So there was a cleanly thing. There's the Wilson's arches down below on the lower left-hand side. That's because he discovered, see, there's another walkway that goes across to it and things like that. Some people ask, where is the Wailing Wall? The Wailing Wall would be just to the left of that bridge there. That would be the area of the Wailing Wall. It has a small section for women and then a larger section for men. You have to wear a hat, head covering. If you don't have one, they'll give you one made out of paper, a heavy paper, and fold it over like a sailor's hat. So now what we have in chapter 23, quite a bit of material here, because it's got a lot of notes. And so it is a continuation now of what happens with Paul. And so Paul looked intently at the Sanhedrin now. See, this is just a continuation. After he's been beaten, he says, my brothers, I have conducted myself with a perfectly clear conscience before God to this day. See, down below he says, you whitewashed wall. There are hypocrites who walk around as if they are holy or religious or something like that. For example, Putin considers himself to be a loyal Orthodox Christian. And as these things go on with all the perfidy of these leaders, you can find just a terrible, terrible sense that they are out of touch. They are hypocrites. So the high priest Ananias ordered his attendants to strike his mouth. Now that happens to Jesus, by the way. Remember in the Synoptic Gospels, he is brought in, and it's against the law to harm a prisoner like that, but one of the men hits him hard. And the Shroud of Turin has a section above one of the eyes there that looks like it had some blood from it. Do you realize that the Shroud of Turin is made up of threads? Now, a thread, is very small, but it's not the thread that is the image. It is the top of it. It just makes it all the more mysterious, because you think, well, what happened? This obviously it was never painted, and but the energy inside seems to have seared it, but only the very top level of it. So that's why it's kind of faint. Well, we could talk about that for a long time. So Paul said, God will strike you, you whitewashed wall, hypocrites. You indeed sit in judgment upon me according to the law, and yet in violation of the law order me to be struck. So I put on the left-hand side who this Ananias is. He's one of Herod's appointed people in the year 47, and he goes all the way up to 59, which is just around the time of Paul. And then he retires from that, but in 66, he was assassinated in a revolt. And so now I have some quotes from Timothy over here on the right. And these are the type things that you get. Like if you go to Matthew 23, 27 or 13:33, you will find these kind of comments made, especially in Matthew, where he has these things about you whitewashed tomb. That on the inside you have the smell and odoriferous air of a body that's decaying, whereas outside it's painted real nice white and stuff like that. Looks like an igloo. So the attendants say, would you reveal the God's high priest? Paul said, see, this is a terrible, terrible parallel. Remember what happens with Jesus back in the year 30. April 7th is when he dies, and he is before Caiaphas. He is 7 days before, he had just raised Lazarus from the tomb. And people then go to the Sanhedrin and say, we have to get rid of him because people are following him and causing a great unrest. And so what happens is that they talk about it, and Caiaphas makes this statement because I love this writing. Caiaphas, the high priest that year, year 30, high priest that year, like, wow, is that a great potentate? I mean, that's incredible. And who does he have in front of him? The high priest of eternity, Jesus the Christ. So he is the high priest that, you just say, what a minuscule person he is compared to the Lord of the universe. And so and he says, it's better that one man dies to save the people. See, in other words, by executing Jesus, they will have the Romans, because the Caiaphas and his crew, which are the Sadducees, are much in league with the Romans. And so they don't want to have any troubles there. And this is the time of Passover anyway. So let's go back to verse 5. Brothers, I did not realize he was high priest, for it is written, you shall not curse a ruler of your people. See, from Exodus, that's one of the rules they have. Paul was aware there were some Sadducees and some Pharisees, so he called out before the Sanhedrin, my brothers, I'm a Pharisee. Now, this is the first time we ever hear that he's a Pharisee, and son of Pharisees. He says, I'm on trial for hope in the resurrection of the dead. Why does he say that? Well, because the Sadducees, which are few in number but great in power, they don't believe at all in the resurrection. But from the year 180 on into the time of Christ, the Pharisees are starting to come to a resurrection because of the battles they're fighting, and saying, if our youth are going out to defend us and they die, why wouldn't God continue their life in an afterlife? And so they come up with the idea that there is a life after death. They don't know the details of it, but they know that. So the Sadducees are against Christ for that, and the Pharisees are for him for that. When he said this, a dispute broke out between the Pharisees, Sadducees, and the group became divided. What a great tactic I put down. Is you're standing before the judges, and the judges are fighting each other. So you think, well, that's pretty good. Maybe you can just kind of gently back out of there. So anyway, for the Sadducees say there is no resurrection or angels or spirits, while the Pharisees acknowledge all three. A great uproar occurred, and some of the scribes belonging to the Pharisee party stood up and sharply argued, "We find nothing wrong with this man. Suppose a spirit or an angel has spoken to him." See, but the Sadducees are the ones who are really against Jesus. So the dispute was so serious that the commander, afraid that Paul would be torn to pieces by them, ordered his troops to go down and rescue him from their midst and take him to the compound. So the following night, the Lord stood by him and said, now this is another appearance of the Lord to Paul. These things are magnificent. And to have Jesus come himself, the Lord of all, and to stand before you and to encourage you. And this is what he says: take courage, for just as you have borne witness to my cause in Jerusalem, so you must also bear witness in Rome. See, this prepares the reader for what will happen to Paul. You must also bear witness in Rome. So in other words, he's told him that he's not going to die in Jerusalem. He's now telling him he will not be imprisoned here, although he's in prison for 2 years. He will not be imprisoned to the end of his life here in Caesarea. He will die in Rome. That's what's the future. So now transfer to Caesarea. When the day came, the Jews made a plot and bound themselves by oath not to eat or drink until they had killed Paul. Oh boy. So there is a tribe out here that they're going to get Paul no matter what. The easy way to do it is this. He says there were more than 40 who signed up for this conspiracy. So they went to the chief priests and elders, says, we bound ourselves by a solemn oath to taste nothing until we've killed Paul. See, so they went to the chief priests and elders, says, we have bound ourselves by the solemn oath, and they join up with these 40 people. So you together with the Sanhedrin must now make an official request to the commander to have him bring him down to you. See, in other words, they're going to put it on to the Sanhedrin to bring Jesus back to Jerusalem, where they're going to kill him on the way. And of course, the Sanhedrin could be blamed, but they didn't do it. The Romans could be blamed, but they didn't do it. And so they get away with it. And so anyway, you together with the Sanhedrin must make an official thing to bring him down here. We on our part are prepared to kill him before he arrives. Now the son of Paul's sister, that's his nephew, heard about the ambush, so he went and entered the compound and reported it to Paul. Paul called one of the centurions, says, take this young man to the commander. He has something to report to him. Isn't it interesting? It's the first time we find out that Paul had like a family. I mean, he's got his sister, he's got children, and one of them is going to save Paul's life. So he took him and to the commander, said, this prisoner called me, asked me that I bring this young man to you. Commander took him by hand. See, this is another one of those phrases you wonder, why do they have to say that? Because of the fact that what's a handshake? See, it's an allegiance to each other. So this commander here is not somebody who's automatically against Paul and out to get him killed or anything like that. He is a kind of appreciative of the fact that he can handle this situation and it won't go back to Rome. He says the Jews have conspired to ask you to bring Paul down to the Sanhedrin tomorrow, as though they meant to inquire about him more thoroughly. But do not believe them. More than 40 of them are lying in wait for him. They have bound themselves by oath not to eat or drink until they have killed him. They're now ready and only wait for your consent. See, in other words, if the plot fails, they're not going to be in any trouble, because it says, well, we talked about it and stuff, but we never did it. So anyway, everybody's in a distance from the responsibility. So as the commander dismissed the young man, he directed him, tell no one who you gave me this information. Then he summoned 2 of the centurions and said, now wait till you hear this. This centurion does not in any fashion want to be called into question about allowing Paul to get killed, a Roman citizen. So listen to the overload here. Get 200 soldiers ready to go to Caesarea by 9 o'clock tonight, along with 70 horsemen and 200 auxiliaries. See, these auxiliaries I put down, these are spearmen. In other words, they don't have the full army regalia of breastplate and a hat, with a plume on it. And so this would be a walk of some 60 miles. So they will stop on the way for overnight, and then they'll go back again. Provide mounts for Paul to ride. Give him safe conduct to Felix, the governor. Now, the governor is the governor of the province. We've talked about this. The province means this whole section of this area of around Israel is a province, and the man in charge of it is the procurator of that, and that procurator's name is Felix. And Felix himself is a man of seemingly nobility. So then he wrote a letter with this content in Latin, of course. Why do they have a letter? Because you want to have paperwork proof of everything that you're doing. Claudius Lysias to His Excellency the Governor, this man seized by the Jews and about to be murdered by them, I rescued after intervening with my troops when I learned that he was a Roman citizen. I wanted to learn for the reason for their accusations against him, so I brought him down to their Sanhedrin. I discovered he was accused in matters of controversial questions of their laws and not of any charge deserving death or imprisonment. Since it was brought to my attention that there will be a plot against the man, I'm sending you at once to you. I have notified his accusers to state their case against him. So the soldiers, according to their orders, took Paul and escorted by night to Antipatris. This is halfway there. So anyway, next day they returned to the compound, leaving the horsemen to complete the journey with him. See, the ultimate authority here is Augustus Caesarea. I should say Augustus Caesarea, Caesar, Augustus Caesar. And the town is called Caesarea for that reason. Herod named it Caesarea because Caesar is his boss. So anyway, when they arrived in Caesarea, they delivered the letter to the governor, presented Paul to him. When he had read it and asked to what province he belonged and learned that he was from Cilicia, he said, I shall hear your case when your accusers arrive. Then he ordered that it be held custody and adherence praetorium. So now who is Felix? He is called Excellency, which in Greek is the word is Christos. He's born a slave. He's freed by Antonia, the mother of Claudius. He's a member of the Equestrian Order, so he's fairly well respected, not like Pontius Pilate. He's not appreciated by historians of that time. He had the power of a king and the mind of a slave. He used excessive violence. Paul was in prison for 2 years. The fear of what to do with him kept him there. So that ends chapter 23. So now next week we have a holy day, and then the week after we return to this event. And all the proper rituals of the holy day. So I landed in Shannon with Father Dave Dillon back in the 1970s. And Father Jim Wilson used to be here, joined us. And he had a car because he came from Boston. And so he zipped us, got our luggage, zipped us right over to Dirty Nellie's pub. And when we got to the pub, he arranged, he says, 3 Guinnesses, please. 3 of us. So you know how they pour Guinness? They pour a third of the glass, and then it sits there. So the bubbles come up and stuff. Well, we didn't know that. So anyway, we said she started it, but she didn't finish. She must have got a phone call. So then she comes back and she goes another third up. And about 5 minutes later, she goes, gets another third. By now, the foam is very thick. So she comes with a little stamper that's got a shamrock in it. So you can stick it right into the foam because it's so thick. So when you get your Guinness, you're looking at a shamrock. Pretty clever. That was our introduction to.
Did you ever go to the UK?
Yes, yes. Well, I lived in Scotland for a while.
Oh, well, every glass, a pint glass throughout the UK is the same.
Oh my goodness.
They're all the same.
Yeah.
All shaped the same.
Yeah.
Goes up, goes up. And when you go into a pub, and they pour you a pint. I mean, you don't ever get I'll get a half a pint. I don't not cold enough.
Okay.
But you get a pint and it has to go right to the top. No foam, no nothing.
Oh,
Otherwise you're getting cheap.
oh.
Most don't like it.
Now, if you go to Bavaria, they got a big jug thing like this with a pint in it, you know, actually a quart. And they have a line drawn in the glass, in the big mug. And you go up there and then the foam is from there up.
Yeah. So they do not want cold.
So for purposes of recording, do you want to see if there's any questions and then we'll stop the recording?
Yes, do you want?
Well,
Oh, we didn't ask if you had any comments or questions you wanted to make. Dear Diary, once again, superlative presentation of material, leaving no question behind, and mostly heard by people. Thank you.
all right. Thank you for listening to our recording. We're going to be stopping that right now. And we'll see you next time.